By now you'll have read this title, An Introduction to the Principles of Musical Notation. In reading the title you may well have heard the sounds of the words in your head, even if you didn't say them out loud. The written words represent sounds like an or to. It's just the same with music, and in this first section of the video we're going to look at the way that music is written down. Notation, as with words, is a way of representing sounds in visual terms. We can retain music that we want to remember by writing it down. Or we can read off the notation, turning it back into sound when we want to perform it. To describe basic features of musical sounds, we use visual analogies. A note can be low or high, long or short. By placing a note high on the music, we represent a high pitch. And by placing it low, we represent a low pitch. To help us measure the amount by which one note is higher or lower than another, we place the notes on a horizontal grid called a staff or stave, conventionally of 5 lines. So the pitch of the note is represented by the height at which each note is placed. When the note has a stem, like this one, the stem does not affect the pitch. It's the head of the note which shows the pitch level. The stem is part of the system by which we show the length of the note. Adding a stem changes the overall appearance or form of a note. The different note lengths or durations, which together make up the rhythm, are shown by variations in the form of the note. It might seem logical to represent short durations by short notes and long durations by long notes. But this is impractical. The long notes would take up a lot of space, and it would be very difficult to recognise just how much longer or shorter one note was meant to be than another one. So, instead, we use different shapes of notes, drawing from a repertory of open and filled notes, with or without stems, and hooks to the stems. Generally, the rule is that the short notes are more filled in and have more hooks than the longer notes. We've now reached the practical limit of the information that musical notes themselves can carry. They show the pitches by their position, high or low, and the durations by the varying forms of the notes. The other areas of variation in musical sound have to be indicated by adding instructions and symbols to the stave. Dynamics, the variation in loudness, can be indicated by labels or signs placed above or below the notes. One other feature of the sound is the timbre or tone colour. This is largely set by the instruments or voices being used. This is the violin part from an orchestral piece, but of course the overall timbre of the sound is produced by all the instruments playing together. We show this by arranging the music in a score, which shows what all the instruments play simultaneously. One final point. Our notational system uses signs at the start of the staves to provide various bearings to the music that follows. In this example, there is first a clef, which indicates the pitch level, telling you whether the music is in a high or low register. Then there is a key signature. We organise our system of pitch relationships into keys, relating to a home note or tonic, and this sign indicates the key we are using. And then a time signature, which relates to rhythm, indicating a regular metrical arrangement of stresses. You'll be dealing with the topics to which all these signs relate later in the course. They're not as hard or as complicated to interpret as you may now imagine, so don't worry when you see them on a piece of music. For the moment, just accept them as normal and necessary technical features. The thing to remember is that the first actual sounds are represented by the notes which come after these initial signs. That's the end of this section of the video. It covers notational principles that run through the course. You may wish to view it later for reference or revision, but for the moment stop the tape and go to Unit 1.
Everyday life is full of rhythm. So is music. In fact, it's hard to envisage sounds which don't have rhythm. What you hear now is an absolutely unvarying and apparently endless sound. If we assume it is endless, we can say it's without rhythm. It has no definite duration and it has no structure. This is an artificial situation. I can't think of any actual music, or even imagine any music, that is rhythmically like this. Now, how can we give this sound a rhythm? Basically, there are only two things we can do. We can introduce definite durations. Secondly, we could make some sounds stand out above their neighbours. We give them a heavier stress, an accent. Notice that silence can be important. You might notice also that to some extent the two aspects, duration and stress, are interrelated. Sounds that are longer than their neighbours seem to the ear to carry more stress. They acquire an accent. That's the end of this video section. Now return to the unit. The purpose of this part of the video is to explain how to do the exercises in the unit by taking you through some examples using semibreves, minims and their respective rests. The information contained here is repeated in the unit. My aim is to go through the opening exercises with you so that you're in no doubt as to how you should proceed. Section 4 of Unit 1 concentrates on the way that rhythmic symbols translate into sound. This is very important because it marks the beginning in this course of work which brings sound and notation together. Let's begin by using a metronome mark to give the note symbols a definite value. All the exercises in this video will be at crotchet equals 60. That is 1 beat per second. The underlying beat sounds like this. Each click can be represented by 1 crotchet. A semibreve is 4 times the length of a crotchet, and so it's 4 beats long. The semibreve rest looks like this. It's written underneath the second line down, but we're using only 1 line here. It represents a rest of exactly the same duration as a semibreve, 4 beats. Look now at this combination of semibreves and semibreve rest. It sounds like this. Count the clicks to each note and to the rest, 4 to each. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's your turn. Play this sequence on any note of your keyboard. Since you don't have a click track, you'll have to establish a beat for yourself. I suggest you tap your foot. Count 4 beats to each semibreve and semibreve rest. You will find this exercise reproduced in the unit as video example 1. Stop the tape and play it for yourself now. It sounds like this. Here is another exercise. Stop the tape and try it now. It's in the unit as video example 2. It sounds like this. Now the minim. It's written like this, or with the stem going down, like this. It's half as long as a semibreve, so it lasts for 2 beats. The minim rest has the same duration. So at our crotchet equals 60 tempo, this phrase would sound like this. Now some exercises using minims, semibreves and their rests. Try this one. Video example 3 in the unit. This is how it sounds. And here's another exercise. Video example 4 in the unit. It sounds like this. Now return to the unit. The pattern of exercises you will find is the same as on this video, but you will need to use the audio cassette to check your attempts. The exercises you will be doing shortly in section 3.3 of Unit 2 are in 6/8, 9/8 and 12/8 time. These are the compound equivalents of 2/4, 3/4 and 4/4 respectively. 6/8 has 2 beats per bar, like 2/4, but each beat divides into 3, not 2. The difference in sound is quite obvious. Here is the example of 2/4. And here is 6/8. The relationships between 9/8 and 3/4 and between 12/8 and 4/4 are just the same. For example, here are 3/4 and 9/8. First, some quavers in 3/4. And now some quavers in 9/8. Here's a well-known tune in 6/8. Follow the notation as you listen to it. Here it is again with clicks emphasizing the beat. You could rewrite that in 2/4 and it might sound like this. Very different, isn't it? I hope you could hear the difference in the rhythm between the simple and compound time versions. Now let's try some exercises of the sort you'll be meeting in the unit. We'll use the same tempo as we used for simple time signatures, but the metronome marking is slightly different. Because the beat has to divide into 3, we represent it not by the crotchet, but the dotted crotchet. So, dotted crotchet equals 60. And whereas the basic beat in 2/4 is written like this, in 6/8 the basic beat is written like this. Now try playing this rhythm at a tempo of dotted crotchet equals 60. Use any note on your keyboard. It's reproduced in the unit as video example 1. It sounds like this. Notice that in 6/8, a dotted minim represents 2 beats, whereas in simple meters it usually represents 3. This, of course, is because in 6/8 the beat is a dotted crotchet, that is 3 quavers. And 2 dotted crotchets equal 6 quavers. So they make 1 dotted minim, which fills a whole bar. Now try another exercise, this time including some rests. Remember that rests can be dotted, just like notes. Stop the tape. The exercise is in the unit as video example 2. It sounds like this. And here's a harder one, including a tie. It's video example 3 in the unit. That sounds like this. And if you got that right, you're doing well. Now return to the unit. As in Unit 1, you'll find that the pattern of exercises is the same as on this video, but you will need to use the audio cassette to check your attempts.
For those of you who have never played a keyboard instrument of any sort, the prospect that you'll have to gain some proficiency at this skill may well appear daunting. Learning to play a keyboard, as indeed any other instrument, is a major undertaking. The skill involved in playing an instrument, of manipulating your fingers in such a way as to produce complex patterns of sounds, is one that needs considerable application and hard work. You have to be prepared to practice for hours on end, and be grateful for completing even the smallest step along the long path that leads eventually to becoming a competent performer. But of course we aren't in the ballgame of training to become budding concert pianists. Our objectives are much more modest. What we want to do first of all is to be able to play through fairly simple melodies with one hand. That tune is a Welsh folk song called Sir Gun, and you'll be playing it in Unit 4. Having achieved this skill, we need to go on to try and play the harmony exercises that we'll be working through, so that we can hear what they sound like. This matching of the notes on paper with the sounds we hear will involve using both hands together. So our objectives are modest, but nonetheless these will only be achieved through some degree of application, of regular practice, so that we become familiar with the keyboard and can use it rather like we use, say, a knife and fork. We don't want the way we handle our cutlery to interfere with our enjoyment of the food we're eating. Similarly, the actual mechanics of playing the notes on the keyboard mustn't distract us from listening to the sounds we are producing. One final preliminary before we get down to playing. As with the learning of many skills, such as driving a car, using a computer, or indeed training the ear, as we've been doing in our oral exercises, a little practice each day, even if it's only for a few minutes, is much better than spending a longer time but at widely spaced intervals. Frequent short sessions minimize the feeling that practicing is a chore and encourages the sort of familiarity with a keyboard that we are trying to achieve, of almost taking it for granted, of treating it as an extension of ourselves. The moment of success will come when, for the first time, you try and remember what life was like when you couldn't play your keyboard. Now to business. Seat yourself at your keyboard and get ready to play. Like countless beginners before, we'll play middle C as our first note. On this diagram you can see where middle C is. Find it on your keyboard and play it by depressing it with the index finger of your right hand. To check that you have the correct note, I'll play middle C again. This is what your middle C should sound like. If you have the wrong pitch, match it on your keyboard with the one sounding. Now that's middle C. Let's look at its position on the keyboard in relation to the other notes. Notice that the array of notes falls into a particular pattern, seen most clearly perhaps by the grouping of the black notes. A group of 2 black notes is followed by a group of 3, followed by a group of 2, followed by a group of 3, and so on. Middle C comes immediately below a group of 2 black notes. And therefore it shouldn't come as a surprise to find out that if we go up to the next group of 2 black notes, C will be the note immediately below. You should now stop the video and familiarise yourself with the layout of your keyboard. Find middle C first, and then locate all the other Cs. Here are the other Cs on this keyboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The top note also happens to be C, but you may not have recognised it because the black notes above it are not included. Once you've become familiar with this repeated pattern up the keyboard, locating the whereabouts of specific notes will be easy. But meanwhile, let's turn our attention to playing a succession of different notes with different fingers in preparation for playing melodies during Unit 4. Find middle C again, but this time rest your right-hand thumb on the note instead of depressing it with your index finger. Now space out your fingers so that they rest on the adjacent 4 white notes, like this. Starting with the thumb, depress each white note, one at a time, getting higher and higher. When you get to the little finger, reverse the process, and, note by note, return to the thumb. Let's do that again, and this time make sure it's the tips of your fingers that come into contact with the notes. If the tips are touching the notes, you'll find it feels most natural to have the finger slightly curved rather than flat. You'll find it easier to play like this as the exercises develop. This is a 5-finger exercise you can practice just to get used to the idea of moving from one note to another and one finger to another. Try it slowly, placing each successive finger down as you take the previous one up, so that there's no gap in the sound, but yet you never hear 2 notes sounding together. This is by no means easy at first. Stop the tape and try this 5-finger exercise for yourself. Once you feel comfortable, try going up and down a bit faster. It's also worth noting here that the convention for fingering is to number the thumb as 1 and the fingers as 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the exercise you've just played is fingered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, and so on indefinitely. The next exercise will prepare you for playing more than one note at a time. This is obviously a bit harder, so we'll do this in 2 stages. First of all, find middle C with the thumb of your right hand, and then rest your fingers on the following 4 notes, the notes you played singly in exercise 1. Push down your thumb and hold it on middle C. Then push down your middle finger and hold it there. So you're now holding down 2 notes. Finally, push down your little finger and hold it in place. You're now playing a chord. Take your hand off the keyboard and relax for a moment. If you're not used to playing a keyboard instrument, and you can't type, for instance, then you may well find it difficult to manipulate your fingers at this stage. Your index and fourth fingers might have felt as if they were getting in the way. You'll have to make a strong mental effort to make sure they don't hit the notes you don't want. So let's try that once again. Thumb first, then middle finger, and then little finger. Now for the second stage. Try and play all three notes together like this. Remember to watch out for those other two fingers getting in the way. I'm deliberately holding mine well out of the way, but as you gain confidence and your hand relaxes, the fingers will probably drop a little bit, so they rest just slightly above the notes. Stop the tape and practice both these stages until you're happy you've mastered them. So far, we've been using our right hand. But of course, there's the left hand too. And for many of us, this hand is less capable when being manipulated than the right, and needs additional attention. Anyhow, let's apply the two exercises you've learned to the left hand, starting both of them with the thumb on middle C. We'll keep the same fingering pattern for the left hand as we did for the right, but that means that the notes get lower and lower first, and then higher and higher, rather than the other way around. When you play the chord with your left hand, it should sound like this. One last point. When you've played these exercises with your left hand, just go back to your right hand, and you may be pleasantly surprised at how comfortable it feels in comparison. That's the end of this video section. Now return to the unit. In this section of the video, we're going to deal with drawing a treble clef. Of course, it doesn't have to be perfect every time you write one. In fact, a treble clef is really a mnemonic. The note G sits on the second line from the bottom of the stave, and the clef is simply reminding you of that fact, and really needs to be only a rough approximation. However, it's worth practicing drawing treble clefs, because your tutor will no doubt prefer tidy ones when you submit your TMAs. So let's spend a little time seeing how it works in slow motion. The clef should be positioned on the stave so that the second line up from the bottom is the note G. It starts on that line like this. In a curling movement, we move up to the next line, round, back down across the G line, down to the bottom of the stave, back across the G line, and up. The line continues up past the top of the stave, turns, and then comes down in a gentle curving line to just below the bottom of the stave, and you finish off with a little flourish. If this lies more or less vertically, or at least slightly curving to the right, then all is well. If not, then the clef looks wobbly, slanting to the right or left, like this. So try and draw the downward line so that the overall effect is of the clef sitting upright, so to speak. Also, this downward line shouldn't obscure the starting point of the clef, that all-important beginning on the second line. The final downward line passes to the right of this starting point, but to the left of the opening curl. If you now return to the unit at the point you left it, you'll find a series of treble clefs that have been drawn in with dotted lines. If you feel you need practice at drawing the treble clef, begin by penciling over these dotted lines, working slowly at first, becoming quicker as you gain in confidence. Get used to the feel of drawing the whole clef at one go, rather than pausing about halfway through to readjust the position of your hand. You should get used to following through the shape in one continuous movement. There's also 2 blank staves for you to draw treble clefs unaided if you want further practice. Stop the video and try now. That's the end of this video section. Now return to the unit. So far, we've been playing a 5-finger exercise beginning at middle C. This meant that only 5 notes were used, and for the right hand, these were C, D, E, F, and G. Needless to say, we'd be very restricted in the melodies we could play if we could use only these notes. We need to play others, and in order to reach them, we must move our hand. Let's start to practice this with the following exercise. This will include some new notes we haven't used before, and these will be introduced in stages. This is what we're going to play. It's the longest piece of music we've attempted so far, but don't let that deter you. Whenever you come to play a piece of music for the first time, and this is called sight reading, look for any elements in the music that repeat a pattern. This gives you confidence, because even without playing the notes, you can, to a certain extent, imagine what's going to happen. The point to notice here is that there's a repeated pattern every 2 bars. Notice first of all that the rhythm repeats. Each 2 bars consists of 4 crotchets, followed by a minim and 2 crotchets, although in the final bar there's a semibreve. But the pitches form a pattern as well. The pattern of bars 1 and 2 is repeated in bars 3 and 4, but starting on D instead of C. Then bars 5 and 6 repeat the pattern yet again, but starting on E. And finally, from bar 7, starting on F. If we now turn to the fingering, you can see that once again there's a pattern repeated every 2 bars. Basically, we are playing our original 5-finger exercise. However, instead of using all the fingers as we come down from G to C, we leave out our index finger, but go straight from the middle finger to the thumb, which is moved up a note. So instead of playing middle C, the thumb plays D. I'll play the complete exercise through, but I'll pause a little after each 2 bars so that you can see the thumb being moved up. And here the thumb is moved up. And here. And here. Stop the video and try this exercise for yourself. The music is reproduced in your unit. In that exercise, we were just concentrating on the movement of the thumb. But let's play it again, this time in strict rhythm. Listen first as I play it in strict rhythm. Now try it for yourself. Repeat the exercise several times, counting the rhythm out loud if needs be. So, we have now played 3 extra notes: A, B, and C. and these new notes fit above the 5 we already know. If you could cope with that new exercise without any difficulty, we'll try a similar one for the left hand. But if not, play the exercise several more times until you're happy with it. Remember that for each 2 bars, your hand will have moved up 1 note. And clearly, it's better to prepare yourself mentally for this move before you do it, say during the previous bar. Then if you're prepared, everything should proceed smoothly. Now for the left hand. Place the left thumb on middle C. Remember, the fingering is the same as the right hand. So we play and here we move the thumb down 1 note. And here and here again. Once more, we have played an extra 3 notes. This one, and this one. But this time, they lie below the 5 notes we used before. Try this exercise for yourself now. Then remember to play it in the correct rhythm. I'll demonstrate that for you now so that you can check how it should sound. I hope you had at least some success with that exercise. It might have felt strange moving away from the original 5 notes, but in time, moving to different hand positions becomes second nature. In that exercise, we only moved the hand up the keyboard 1 note at a time, but there's no reason why you can't move the hand up several notes at a time. Here's another piece of music to play. Again, we begin with the notes of our original 5-finger exercise. And this time, we want to combine them with the 5-finger hand position beginning on F. You'll notice that 2 of the notes come in both hand positions. The F and the G in the lower hand position, and the F and the G in the higher hand position. But we move to the higher position, starting on F, as early as possible. The fingering we need is therefore 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In order to move the hand to the higher position, the thumb is moved under the index and middle fingers as we play notes D and E. And again. Notice that my thumb begins to move along while I'm playing the D and E, so that it is roughly in the right position at the right time to play the F. By doing this, I am prepared both physically and mentally to play the notes in the higher hand position. Here it is again. Now you have a go, playing it slowly at first and subsequently a little faster. Don't forget to move the thumb along as you play the D and E. If you wait to move the thumb until you reach the F, you'll be too late. As soon as you have mastered passing the thumb under once, as in this exercise, try the following exercise, which is simply an extension of what you have just done. This time, though, you have to pass the thumb under 3 times. Before you play, look at the rhythm. It's mostly crotchets, but with a minim to start bars 1 and 3. Notice, too, that the fingering pattern is 1, 2, 3, pass the thumb, 1, 2, 3, 4, pass the thumb. Then 1, 2, 3 again, pass the thumb. And finally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, the thumb comes on the first note of each bar. 1, 2, 3, 1. Where you have to pass the thumb after the 4th finger, this is a little more difficult than after the 3rd, but you will soon get used to it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As always, prepare yourself for passing the thumb, thinking about it and moving the thumb along before you have to play it. Stop the tape and try it for yourself. Play it slowly at first, getting used to the movement of the thumb, and then, as your confidence increases, play it faster. The notes we've played in this exercise are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. To conclude this video sequence, there are 3 things I'd like to point out about this exercise. Firstly, the music ranges over 2 octaves. There's 1 octave from middle C to this C, and another octave from this C to this C. As we saw in Unit 2, the octave is the most fundamental interval, and the notes involved have the same name, C. We can now play octaves with other pitches, D and D, E and E, and F and F, and so on. Secondly, we've been playing a scale, and this particular scale is called C major. You'll be introduced to scales in detail during Unit 6, and then it'll be explained why this particular scale is called C major. Finally, notice the use of ledger lines for the top A, B, and C. As with the ledger line for middle C, these simply represent more lines of the stave. But for each occurrence of each note, the ledger line, or ledger lines, are written in specially. Before you return to your unit, you might want to practice the last exercise again. That's the end of this video section. Now return to the unit. In this section of the video, we're going to have a quick look at the bass clef. Fortunately, the shape of the bass clef is easier to draw than that for the treble clef, but a little practice won't go amiss. So here goes. Start on the 4th line from the bottom, since this is the line that we want as F. Then, in a curling movement, move up to the top line and round and down in a sweeping curve to end above the bottom line. So far, so good. But in contrast to the treble clef, we still have something to add. Although it's clear which line we want as F, because we start there, it's a convention with the bass clef to add 2 dots to the right of the clef, one each side of the F line. So here and here. The addition of these dots each side of the F line makes it absolutely clear that this is where F is. Now return to the unit at the point you left it and practice writing the bass clef. First, by penciling over the clefs provided in dotted lines. Then, on the 2 blank staves, draw some clefs freehand. Don't forget every time to start on the F line and to round off by putting in the dots to the right of each clef. That's the end of this video section. Now return to the unit.
In this section of the video, we're going to look first at another melody and its construction, and then we'll discuss further the concept of intervals. I'll be asking you to identify and play some intervals as well. Don't worry at the moment about writing anything down. You can practice copying out some of the examples from the unit when you've finished watching this video section. All the music examples appear in the unit. But first, and to bring us into this, I want to take a look at a tune that will extend our melodic range, In the Silver Moonlight, which is a French tune you may know as Au clair de la lune. Remember, the music is reproduced in the unit and the piece is also on your cassette. But for the moment you can follow it while I play. Tunes from different areas of the world frequently make use of similar melodic contours. You might well feel that the first few bars are not unrelated to Siogan, in that the melodic range is restricted to the first 3 notes of the scale. Here's the beginning of Siogan. And similarly, Au clair de la lune. As with Siogan and Rose's Skirt, there are resting points or cadences at the end of each 4-bar section. By the way, as I wrote in the unit, you'll be meeting the word cadence again when you come on to harmony. You can see these places just before and into bars 4, 8, 12 and 16. In a moment I'm going to ask you to play this tune on your keyboard. But first watch me play it once more so you can see which fingers to use. This tune begins on G, so it would seem logical to start with the thumb of the right hand. But after bar 9, the tune goes below the G, and we haven't enough fingers to play it. So it makes sense to start with the middle finger, and then only a very minor adjustment is needed between bars 8 and 9. When you put your little finger on the A of bar 9, you'll find that bars 9 to 12 will fit nicely under the hand. And you'll easily be able to put your middle, that's the third finger, on the G of bar 13. Bars 13 to 16 are the same as bars 1 to 4. Remember, all these examples are in the unit. Now I want you to try. Watch out for the sharp in bar 11. Apart from this one black note, you'll need only the white ones. Now stop the tape and play the tune. If you try playing the tune one note lower, starting on F, or 5 notes lower, starting on C, you'll find you don't need any black notes at all. If you use the middle finger of your right hand on G, F, or C as your first note, you should be able to manage the whole tune quite easily. Here are the first 4 bars starting on F. And on C. Now stop the tape and play the tune again, starting first on F and then on C, using only the white notes as I did. Au clair de la lune differs from Siogan in one important respect. The shape of the melody is such that it moves above and below G, the note on which the tune is based, what was referred to in Unit 2 as the home pitch, the starting point to which you eventually return. There are only 6 different pitches in Au clair de la lune. Because these lie close together, it is said to have a narrow compass, or a restricted melodic range. However, its range is still twice as large as that of the 3-note Siogan. When we begin to discuss such matters as range, compass, and the distance between one note and another, we are moving into the area of musical analysis, however simple the analytical level may be at this stage. In this course, we will be encouraging you to develop your analytical skills as one of our major objectives. It is essential to discuss here the concept of intervals, as it is impossible to compare varying categories of melody without doing so. It is also a prerequisite for any study of harmony and key. In fact, you've already met the idea of intervals. Trevor Bray discussed them in Unit 2. Let's go straight back to square one by considering the simple scale of C. In Unit 2, you came across the concept of scales. You played one on your keyboard. The first note of the scale of C was C. The second, D. The third, E. And so on. The distance between C and D is an interval of a second. And between C and E is a third. An interval is thus the distance between 2 notes. When you calculate intervals, you can see, therefore, that you have to count the lower note as 1. Musicians often say something like C to D as a second, C to E as a third. I'm simplifying the situation slightly because these numbers can be qualified, as we'll see later. but C to D is always a second of some sort, C to E always a third, and so on. Don't forget that when analysing intervals, you always count upwards from the lower note. It follows, too, that the interval from C up to A is a sixth, and C up to B a seventh. Now it's your turn again. Try it yourself on the keyboard. Remembering to count the first note as 1, play all the intervals in the scale of C. You will find all the notes of the scale of C set out in the unit, and the series of intervals is also played on your audio cassette. Now stop the tape. You can also play these intervals simultaneously, in which case you are playing a two-part chord, which you also did in Unit 2. For the unison, only one sound is involved. But the second sounds like this. As you will hear, some of the intervals sound harsh, we often say dissonant, and others sound pleasant or consonant. If I now play one or two of these intervals, you can hear that the second is dissonant and the third is consonant. The octave is the most consonant interval. It's the 2-to-1 ratio, which you'll recall from Unit 2 was formulated by Pythagoras. These intervals, starting with the unison and proceeding through the second, third and so on up to the octave, are on your audio cassette. When you come to the end of this video section, listen to the intervals on the audio cassette and then try them yourself on the keyboard. Listen carefully to the characteristic sound of each interval. This is excellent ear training and will soon assume great importance when you begin to study harmony in more detail. This marks the end of this section of the video, so now stop the tape. In this section of the video, I'm going to show you some examples of antecedent and consequent. What do we mean by this? Essentially, the music poses a question and then provides an answer. There's a good example at the start of Seo Gan. Here, the ascending notes in bars 1 and 3 represent a question, as in speech when you raise the pitch of your voice at the end of a question. The phrases in bar 2 and bar 4 represent answers, as when you lower your voice at the end of a statement. Let me try to expand this a little. Frequently, antecedent-consequent can operate on two levels simultaneously. Bars 1 to 2 can be regarded as an antecedent, since the final D is one note higher than the home note C. Bars 3 to 4 are the consequent, since the melody has returned to its original starting point. Thus, the antecedent has been answered by the consequent. The question has received its answer. On the other hand, bar 2 might be considered the consequent to the antecedent of bar 1, since the general pitch level of bar 2 is lower than that of bar 1. These contradictions are more apparent than real, however, since these different types of expectations, first raised and then fulfilled, all tend to coalesce into a coherent and satisfying musical experience that can be enjoyed first in its own terms and studied subsequently as part of the analytical process. To put it in a simpler way, there is often expectation, which is then succeeded either by a sense of fulfillment or by a sense of frustration. Perhaps sharpened awareness might be a better way of putting it, if one's musical or aesthetic anticipations are not realized. The whole basis of listening to music is a fine balancing act between what you expect to hear and do hear, fulfillment, and what you expect to hear and don't hear, frustration. This holds true for everything from the shortest tune to the longest symphony. Question, answer. Expectation, fulfillment. A sense of tension followed by resolution. All these dual terms convey contrast, and your ear and brain will be stimulated musically if you train yourself to listen carefully all the time, seeing, or rather hearing, if what you hear is what you expect to hear or not. Let's take some simple examples. If I play then even if you don't know Twinkle Twinkle, your ear should tell you that this series of notes, starting on C and ending on G, is a question requiring an answer. It is, of course, the two phrases now make sense. This is because the expectation or frustration set up by the G is resolved by the second phrase ending on the C. The note we started from. Here's part of another tune, the British Grenadiers, which works in the same sort of way. Here again, a question is being asked. To which the answer is the home pitch or note is again C, the note on the first strong beat, and the first phrase ends with the D one note higher. This sets up tension, which is then resolved by the next phrase, returning to the C. If you like to think of it this way, the D is unstable, whereas the home note C is stable. Let's look briefly at the start of a more lengthy piece of music. Here's the opening of Mozart's Fourth Violin Concerto. It begins with a complete statement, neither question nor answer, merely neutral. As you can see, the music continually returns to the home note D. In fact, it scarcely leaves it. Mozart is writing a piece of music on a much larger scale and wishes to emphasize the home note beyond all possible doubt. On the other hand, returning to a shorter piece, what about Pop Goes the Weasel? Remember that in 6/8 time, the beat is divided into 3. Here, as so often in these simple tunes, there are 4 phrases, the first 3 coming securely back to the home note C. This lulls us into a false sense of security, so that the surprising high A, quite foreign to everything heard so far, quickly dispels this cosy fulfilment of the first three phrases. It brings in the unexpected, and its musical function is really to introduce an essential element of surprise, a leap of a sixth from C to A, the highest note so far in the whole tune, a quaver rather than a crotchet on a strong beat. Both these things add the necessary variety, or surprise if you prefer. Finally, here's the start of another tune. It's the opening of Haydn's Emperor's Hymn. There are two phrases. Remembering what I've been saying about antecedent and consequent, I want you now to stop the tape and write down how you would describe these two phrases and why. Did you spot and could you hear that the two phrases seem to be putting the antecedent consequent the other way round? The first phrase ends on C, the note we started from, the home pitch, but the second finishes on G, leaving the second phrase up in the air, as it were. Moreover, this note, 5 notes higher than the home note, has a very particular relationship to it. Do you remember what I suggested earlier in the unit about such a relationship? You'll find more about this in my summary of antecedent consequent, which comes next in the unit. This is the end of this video section. Now stop the tape.
One of the problems with demonstrating anything about acoustics is that the most important elements are invisible. We don't actually see the pressure waves passing through the air, and these can be said to represent the sound in its most direct form. But it's quite helpful to look at an instrument that produces the pressure waves, particularly one such as a stringed instrument, where you can see the displacement of the string as it sets up the waves. If we take a single string on a simple instrument such as this, it's fairly easy to recognise what's happening. The string is fixed at both ends, and when plucked, the complete free length of the string vibrates. This gives you a ready-made picture of the wavelength of the note. The biggest vibration amplitude is in the middle of the string, and there is no vibration at the two ends. That's the basic note that the string produces. A cello string behaves in exactly the same manner. When bowed, the entire string vibrates, with the biggest amplitude in the middle. As you can see, on the cello, such basic notes are produced by an open string. If you want a note of different pitch, you can produce one by putting your finger down on the string. This shortens the vibrating length and gives you a higher note. In other words, the frequency of the pitch increases. If the length is halved, the frequency is doubled. If the length is reduced to 1/3, the frequency becomes 3 times as high. And so on. It's possible to pick out the sound of these various divisions by touching the string lightly at the exact mathematical ratios, not shortening the sounding length, but encouraging one of these other vibration patterns from the full length of the string. Each pattern involves a subdivision of the string into equal parts. In the second pattern, the string is divided into 2 parts and behaves rather like a string of half the original length. Because of this, it produces a note of twice the original frequency. Similarly, the next pattern leads to a note with 3 times of the original frequency. And so on. These higher frequency notes are known as harmonics, and the basic note arising from the original pattern is known as the fundamental. Most musical instruments, including the voice, produce quite complex sounds. When we think that we only hear one note, this is in practice accompanied by various harmonics in different intensities. The harmonics bear simple frequency ratios to the fundamental. These ratios, taken in an increasing order, are known as the harmonic series. On a brass instrument, such as the natural horn, the player can adjust the way he sets the air in the instrument tube vibrating and pick out the various harmonics. On a valveless instrument, in fact, the different notes available to the player are basically those of the harmonic series. Combinations of the fundamental with the lower harmonics, those with the simplest ratios, produce generally an agreeable sound. A frequency that does not bear a simple ratio to the fundamental cannot be fitted into a tidy vibration pattern. This pattern, for example, would fit 2.7 times into the length of our fundamental. Mixing such a messy frequency in with the notes of our original harmonic series would produce a dissonance. That's the end of this video section. Now, return to your unit. In this section of the video, we're going to look at triads, how they're constructed, how you play them, and what they sound like. Let's start by looking at the triad of C major in close position. That is, in its simplest form, with the notes bunched together and C at the bottom. It consists of the notes C, E, and G. The C in this particular version is the middle C near the centre of your keyboard. If you put your right-hand thumb on this note, the other notes fall into a miss one, play, miss one, play pattern. If you put your fingers over a running series of white notes, then the triad can conveniently be played with fingers 1, 3 and 5, like this. Now try this for yourself. You may want to stop the video for a moment while you work it out. Remember that the bottom note of the triad is middle C. It's also useful to be able to play triads with your left hand. In this case, the fingers will be 5 on C, 3 on E, and the thumb on G. This triad on middle C is in the centre of the keyboard. But the thing to remember is that a C-E-G combination is always a triad of C major, whichever register of the keyboard you choose. Low or high. Now try a triad of C with your left hand. If you find that it's a bit awkward to play it in the middle of the keyboard, try it beginning on a lower C. Again, you may wish to stop the tape while you try. Now let's look at some other triads built on different notes. You can play these with either hand, but I'm going to use my right hand for the demonstration. You now have the standard hand position for a triad, a 1-3-5 pattern. The 1, which will be played with your thumb if you're taking the right-handed option, gives you the root note of the chord. It'll be C if it is a triad of C, F if it is a triad of F, and so on. The other notes, played by the other fingers, add the 3rd and the 5th to the triad. So you should now be able to move from playing one triad to another quite simply using this finger shape. All you have to do is to transfer the hand position sideways, up or down the keyboard. Start from your triad of C and simply play up the keyboard's white notes in triad steps, keeping the 1-3-5 hand position until you reach the next C with your thumb, and then come down again. Now stop the video and try this yourself. That exercise was not very good for hearing the sound of individual triads, because you heard them in a fixed relationship to one another. You related them, in fact, to the C major scale that you were playing with your thumb. So, in the unit exercises that follow, it's a good idea to leave a silence between each triad, to lose the sound of the first before you try the next one. Remember also the simple rule. The bottom note, played here by the thumb, always gives you the root of the triad. If you're asked for a triad of F, the bottom note is F. If you're asked for a triad of A, the bottom note is A. And so on. Above the root note, you construct the 1-3-5 pattern. That's the end of this section of the video. Now stop the tape and return to the unit. In this section of the video, we're going to look at how a triad, and therefore the chord that you can build from the triad, can relate to a melody note. You'll remember from the unit that the first rule of harmonisation is that the notes of the common chord contain only the notes of the triad. It follows from this, at least at the basic level of harmony with which we're now dealing, that we can make a new rule, which is that a note in a melody must be included in the triad that accompanies that note. In other words, the accompaniment must fit or harmonise the melody note. Later I'll be asking you to try to fit some triads to a melody note, but first let me take you through an example. I play the single melody note with my right hand and the triad with my left. To do this, I arrange my left hand into the triad shape. With my little finger, I play the root note of the triad. Then I miss a note and put my middle finger to play the third. Then miss a note and use my thumb to play the fifth. So I'll keep that shape throughout, and for these examples I'm only going to use the white notes of the keyboard. For the first example, I'm going to use the melody note F. You can play it with any finger of your right hand. You can hold it down, or you can repeat it as often as you like to keep the sound going when you need it. Against this, I'm going to play various triads to see which ones fit. When you come to do it, you may prefer to work systematically up the triad scale. Or to hop around with different triads. If you pause and listen carefully on each one, you will hear that some sound better than others. Some of the triads fit, and some, as I hope you can hear, do not. Some sound quite nice, but they are not common chords. That is, they introduce an extra note into the chord which is not part of the three-note triad, and for the moment we don't count them. It's your turn now. I'm going to ask you to stop the tape and try this out for yourself. Hold the F with the finger of your right hand and play the various triads with your left hand to see which you think fit. When you find one that does fit, hold down the triad and with your other hand write down the name of the triad, that is, the root note. See how many triads you can find that will fit. Now stop the tape. Well, let's see how you got on. One of the triads that fits with F is not surprisingly the one that starts on F. So that's F, A and C. Another one that fits with F is the triad on D, with the notes D, F and A. There's also the triad on B, with the notes B, D and F. But you may not like the sound of this one quite so much. You'll see that all three triads which work include the note F, but each of these triads has a different character. The triad on F is a major triad, and the triad on D is a minor triad. The triad on B is neither major nor minor, but has the special sound of a diminished triad. When you stop the tape in a moment, play these triads again. F major, D minor, and B diminished, and listen for the differences in character. Now stop the tape. Before going back to the unit, I want you to try the same exercise using a different melody note. This time, find the triads that will fit the melody note A. Against the A, try out different triads and write down the names of those that will fit. Afterwards, you can check with the answers printed at the back of the unit. That's the end of this video section. Now stop the tape.
This is the video section for Unit 6. You've already played a scale of C on your keyboard by ear, or from memory if you like. Since then, you've become accustomed to the visual aspects of notation and may perhaps have been practicing simple melodies and phrases at the keyboard. If so, you may find this section of video a little elementary in places, because I'm going to go back over the major scale in some detail, using notation, so you can see how the sounds fit the notes on the screen. So I'll be covering some of the points I've just been making in the unit. If it seems easy, regard this as a bonus and move quickly on to the remainder of Unit 6. If it doesn't, study this section carefully, as it's important to understand how the major scale is constructed. You'll need to have your keyboard to hand as we work through this section. Perhaps you'll be relieved to know that we've finished with modes and we'll be dealing from now on with modern scales. First, I'd like you to think again about equal temperament, which I mentioned in section 3. For our purposes, it's simply the octave divided into 12 equal steps, or as I should say, intervals. One way of expressing this is to show that each interval is formed by two adjacent notes, whether black or white, on your keyboard. In fact, you played this 12-note scale earlier in the course, and you now know that each of these 12 notes is a semitone apart. Of course, all scales add an extra note at the top to complete the octave. This scale, by the way, is known as the chromatic, literally coloured scale. The major scale and all the modes we were discussing in section 3 use only 7 out of these 12 notes. These 7 are arranged in a combination of semitones, 2 adjacent notes, and tones, 2 notes separated by one other. As you can see on the keyboard, where the 2 notes are adjacent, this represents the smallest possible step, a semitone. And where there is a note in between, the distance is a tone. You may have noticed that no 2 black notes can be less than a tone apart. When you played a major scale in section 3, I used the analogy of an unevenly spaced staircase. And as the staircase shows, the semitones occur between the 3rd and 4th notes and between the 7th and 8th notes in the scale. This arrangement then repeats itself at each succeeding octave. I'm now going to play slowly a major scale starting on C. While I play, watch how the staircase develops. In section 3, I wrote about the flavours of the different modes and scales. With our major scale, its characteristic flavour is achieved by the special arrangement of tones and semitones. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Now for fingering. Start with your thumb on C, use your second finger on the D, your middle finger on E, passing your thumb under the fingers so that it's ready for the F. Then you'll have enough fingers to complete the octave. stop the tape and try this for yourself. Melodies, chords using only the notes occurring in this scale, as well as whole pieces whose basic parameters are defined by this scale, are all said to be in the key of C major. As far as the construction of the C major scale is concerned, try to remember the sequence of 2 tones and 1 semitone occurring twice with a tone, F to G, separating them. Or you may find it easier to remember that the major scale consists of 2 halves, C to F and G to C. Each of these halves is built up in the same way. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, with an interval of a tone in between each half. The 2 halves, actually the technical word is tetrachord, literally 4 notes, match exactly. Well, we've treated the C major scale pretty exhaustively. And you might have been wondering about other major scales. Are they like the C major scale or different? Well, they all use the same pattern. That's to say the arrangement of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone is preserved in all of them. And there are 12 major scales, each beginning on the 12 different notes which make up the chromatic scale. Once you've moved away from C major, you'll need to use accidentals in order to preserve the correct patterning for the major scale. This is exactly what we did when transposing melodies in Unit 4. The first 3 notes of C organ in D major are as follows. And because the tune's first 2 intervals have to be a tone apart, we must sharpen the F, otherwise the second interval will not be a tone but a semitone. The need to preserve the major scale tone-semitone patterning when you start on a different note from C generates the extra accidentals and through them the necessity for key signatures, which I mentioned in section 3. We'll deal with key signatures later in the unit, but for now this is the end of this video section and you should return to the unit.
This is the video section for Unit 7. You've just written out a scale of C major, and it should look like this. I'm going to play that scale slowly with my right hand. With my left hand, I'm going to try chord 1 against each note in turn to see if it fits. If it sounds pleasant and consonant, we'll put a Roman figure 1 under the note. Let's begin with C. That sounds fine, so we'll put figure 1 under the melody note. Now I'll try the next note. I don't like the sound of that, so I'm going on to the next one, E. Good, that's fine. Now F. No. G. Yes. A. No. B. No. And top C should fit. Yes, that's fine. We've already harmonised half the notes of the scale. Now I'll try chord 5 against the remaining notes. This is chord 5. It doesn't matter where on the keyboard I play it. I can play it here, or here, or here. I'll just fit it in wherever I have room. Now, we've already got chord 1 to go with the C. I'll try 5 under D. Yes, that fits. We've got chord 1 under the E. So let's try 5 under F. Well, listen to that again. That's not quite right. It sounds consonant enough, but a bit different from the other chords. In fact, we've made a new kind of chord, and you will be learning about it in section 7 of this unit. But I won't use it now, because I want you to get used to the plain and simple sounds of primary triads. We've already chosen chord 1 to go with G. Does 5 go with A? No. Does it go with B? Yes. And we'll finish with chord 1 again for top C. The last stage is very easy. There are only 2 notes left without a chord under them, and chord 4 must fit these. By the way, I can play chord 4 here or here. Let's now play the entire scale with the chords. Chord 1, chord 5, chord 1, chord 4, chord 1, chord 4, chord 5, chord 1. Before stopping the video, make sure you can play the whole exercise for yourself, writing the chord symbols under your scale just as we've done. You can check your work with video example 1 in the unit. This ends the video section for Unit 7.
A214 is not a course in keyboard playing. However, some understanding skills are learnt most quickly at the keyboard. This is not a new discovery. Many major composers, including Handel, Mozart and Beethoven, learned and taught at least part of their harmony skills principally through the keyboard, as you'll find out in television programme 6. The useful thing is that you can often feel the movement of the harmony or of individual parts through your fingers, particularly in the case of some striking or commonly used musical progressions. And if you can make an effective link between the sound of the music and the feel of it under your fingers, then it's a short and efficient step to writing down the music quickly. So, being able to play a few simple and frequently used harmonic progressions at the keyboard is a very useful skill. And it can also be quite satisfying once you have the hang of it. It's useful to be able to play a perfect cadence, that is chord 5 followed by chord 1, in the most commonly used keys. One very common chord progression for phrase endings consists of the perfect cadence preceded by chord 1C. That is the progression 1C, 5, 1. This involves 1C, a second inversion chord, which until now you've been told not to use. As you know from Unit 5, second inversion chords have a very limited use, and the 1C, 5, 1 progression is the principal one. Normally, because of its inherent instability, the second inversion chord in this context is treated as a dissonance, and thus falls on a strong beat. Let's first of all look at the melodic pointers to the use of 1C51. The melodies involved are very easy to spot. They have endings that approach the tonic note either by returning do, ti, do, or by descending steps mi, re, do. For the first stage of this exercise, I'll make life nice and easy by doing everything in C major. So the cadence melodies in this key to watch out for would be Do, Ti, Do, C, B, C, or Mi, Re, Do, E, D, C. On your keyboard, find and try out these two melodies. Before proceeding, let's look at the chord progressions involved. We'll concentrate only on the Do, Ti, Do one first. And in fact, we'll cut things down even further by starting with just 1C5 without the final chord. The pattern to notice is that two parts, the bass and one other, remain stationary, while the other two fall by step. Now let's just try the outline of the 1C5 progression on the keyboard. To make things easier at this early stage, I'm going to leave the bass part by itself in your left hand and put the other three parts in the right hand. To help you think of this, I'll move the tenor part in the music up into the treble clef. On your keyboard, find the note G with the left hand. Holding the G with your left hand, find the note C about an octave and a half higher with your right hand. Because we have to play a chord below that C, I suggest that you play the C with your little finger. Stop the tape and try this. Now, in the right hand, fill in the notes G and E below the C. Remember to keep hold of that G in the left hand at the same time. The total result will be this four-part chord. 3 notes in the right hand, from the top C, G, E, and 1 note G in the bass. Here is the sound of the chord. Now stop the tape and play it for yourself. So now we have our 1C chord. Now remember, as we proceed to 5, 2 notes will stay still and 2 will fall by step. The 2 that remain stationary are the bass and the G in the middle of the right hand. Remember to repeat these notes. The other 2 notes move down to the next white note, like this. You may find that it feels as if you're having to perform acrobatic tricks with your fingers at first, but a couple of practices will soon make things easier. Here once again is the drill. 2 notes stay still, 2 fall by step. Stop the tape and practice the progression until you're confident of it. The last stage is easy. after 1C5, to return to chord 1, all you have to do in the right hand is to move it back to the original position. So the right hand goes as follows. Chord 1C, 2 notes fall to 5, 2 notes rise again to 1. Just try that for yourself, right hand only. Now for the left hand. You play the G twice with your thumb, and then the note C under the little finger. When you put the hands together, you may at first have a problem of synchronization. You'll probably try and move the left hand too early. So, before doing the whole thing, I suggest that you just try to outline treble and bass parts. With the left hand, G, G again, C. And with the top fingers of the right hand, C, B, C. Now we'll just put those two parts together, thus. Now stop the tape and try that for yourself. When you're confident of that outline, then fill in the inner notes of the chords. The total result will be Watch while I do that very slowly. Now stop the tape and try for yourself the complete 1C5-1 progression. Now we'll try 1C5-1 using the Mi Re Do melody. The left-hand part is the same. That is G, G, C. And the note that remains the same in the right hand between 1C and 5 is this time played by the thumb. In fact, the right-hand part of 1C5 is quite easy to play because the top two notes simply fall by step while the thumb stays still. Here it is with both hands. Stop the tape and try this for yourself. The difficulty with this melody is that in order to play the last chord, you have to move your right hand position downwards so that the Do note is played by the little finger. Here are the three chords in the right hand. 1C5 with two notes falling by step, followed by the change in hand position for the last chord. So the whole thing sounds like this. Try it for yourself, right hand only, listening carefully to the sound of the chords. Now put the left hand with it, and the result is as follows. Try it for yourself. That's certainly harder to play than the do-ti-do ending. But the 1-C-5-1 progression in its two forms is so useful that it's worth attempting it in different keys. It works in the minor keys as well as in the major keys. Here it is in C minor with the do-ti-do melody, and with the mi-re-do melody. Some examples in different keys are printed in the video notes, and you might like to attempt to play them. This is an optional exercise, but you'll find that if you can gain a feel for these cadences, however slowly, it'll help speed up your harmony work later in the course. That's the end of this video section and concludes the work for Unit 8.